All right. Well, Nathan, as we were mentioning before we started, I think my only claim to fame is being one of the last 13 of the old original, my term, design department
Mm-hmm.
that was per the years of Bucky. I think it was organized more under Herb Cohen, Bill Perk here locally, and on our dome board had a lot of influence on that. And it was just a fantastic program. As one of my colleagues put it, they taught us how to think. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a goosebump moment because it's the truth. They really did teach how to think
Mm-hmm.
and how to create. And Harold Grosowski and his innovative and contemporary environments course, GSC 205, on how to ideate to create ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a program that suited me nicely.
I appreciate the taught to think component of schooling at SIU. So I went through the comm department at a time where there were a number of influential and high quality teachers in the comm department. There still are now, but I just these folks were particularly influential on me. And I, as you say that now, it clicks in my mind. Like what I tell folks, I went to school so I could become a more well rounded person and pursue education that way. But that's the fit, right? They taught how to think, and maybe that's the key value to an education anymore these days is not just here's the textbook and learn it, but how to think about the actual execution of the work that you're going to do on the other end.
I think the underlying point we're really getting to is being above mere technical concerns, which
Mm-hmm.
are important. That's obviously a part of school, and we have to learn those in any profession. But there's I think a higher regard in that thinking component, and that you can put yourself 1,000 feet up, try to look at an overall picture. And I think Bucky was sort of the master at that. I
Mm-hmm.
think he paved the way, like a lot of the great thinkers of the last few centuries, that they could see the overall picture and explain it in a manner that everyone else could understand it. Um, just to close the loop on the initial discussion with the old design department, I call it, in an endearing manner, is that the following semester cycle, upon my graduation, the design department was absorbed into the art department, if I have my history correct.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, cool. Sorry, I wasn't sure if there was an additional
No,
component to that as we were going along. And then the AC kicks on. It's always funny when an AC kicks on for the first time. It's kind of like, huh, what?
no problem.
But the um, and so was there always an initial draw to Buckminster Fuller having been in school around the time that his tenure existed? Or I mean, I guess what was his actual timeline at SIU? Because is that part of something that you would have had a good comprehension on, having written that book as well?
Yeah, we did research it for the book, and of course Bucky was here from roughly 1960 to around 1972, and here's a relative term because he was a world traveler,
Mm-hmm.
world speaker. He spent a matter of weeks or a few months in the Carbondale area
Mm-hmm.
under Dwight Morris's, what I want to say, sanctioning. He was kind of a world figure,
Mm-hmm.
and has brought a lot of notoriety to SIU and Carbondale because of that, and still does. So that 10 or 12 years, it was influential. He actually produced many of his patents and many of his books and things while living in Carbondale.
Nice.
And of course, Anne Hewlett Fuller, his wife, did reside literally, I think, most of the year, most of the time, here in Carbondale.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Just kind of have that feel, even even though you're all over, just spreading the gospel, right? Of
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I'm probably not the Bucky file that a lot of folks think I am.
uh-huh.
I happen to love geometry, and I think every architect probably should love geometry.
Yeah.
But I came to Bucky's, I want to say, recognition or admiration uh, because of geometry, frankly. And then when you start reading Utopia or Oblivion and the Dymaxion World, and I have a synergetic set. And I was like, holy cow, this is a lot more involved than some of his philosophical musings, which are excellent. And there's somewhat of a parallel, and there is, I think, a connection with Bucky and Einstein. But, of course, Einstein's so well known for the famous equation. But that, in a way, is unfortunate. It overshadows Einstein's philosophy, too, because he was such a great social thinker, like Bucky. And, you're recognizing, boy, these are people with powerful minds.
I think that is spot on for the transition here as we talk about powerful minds on the 68th episode of the WTF Carbondale podcast, where we talked to interesting people about their interesting lives and tie it all back to this little old place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois. And Thad Heckman here for this episode may not be the person to to tout his own horn in regards to his own mind, but I mean, you just in the little bit of work that you've shared with me, right? It's just cool to get a feel for the mind of a designer that again thinks not just in terms of functionality, but in all of the other components that go into it. I really appreciated just the piece that you shared with me out of the book in relation to the original sketch that is now in the library. Am I getting it right? Library of Congress.
Yeah.
And that is not just the technical component to what you do, but that is the artistic side to it as well.
Nathan, if you're asking me about the drawing, it was it's called the Holland Prize, colloquially, as well as it's sanctioned by the National Park Service. And it was a competition started in 2011 to document on one single sheet of paper, 24 by 36 inches, a historical building. And at the time, I happened to be working on the preservation drawings for the Bucky Dome. And I'm not sure if it wasn't Brent Ritzel, who incidentally wrote the SAT grant that allowed us to do the Phase 1 structural renovation and preservation of the dome. But I think it was Brent that actually pointed out the Holland Prize to me. He says, Thad, you ought to consider entering this. And I looked at it, and I was like, well, I'm doing the drawing anyway. And so I thought, I'll just clean it up and, make it a little nicer, organize the sheet. And there's actually a deep personal aspect of it. I thought, I'm going to... The Library of Congress required the drawing be done in archival quality inks and paper, or you could do it on CAD. Well, I call it AutoThad. I'm not the AutoCAD guy. And so I did it old school and drew it by hand, but in pen and ink and on archival quality media, of which I happen to have quite a bit of experience with, being a little older. And so with that in mind, I decided, per my wonderful stepfather, now deceased, who was very encouraging and recognized some talent perhaps when I was quite young, about 14, and took me to buy some very nice equipment for drawing, etc., including a Leroy set, and I have a very nice drafting machine, again, old school, that I still use. I use most of this stuff. But I got out the archival stuff, and I did the drawing using those original equipment from all those years ago when I was young, just as a, homage to him. And I was pleased to tuck a copy of the drawing into his casket right before they closed it. But at any rate, so going back to the requirements for the drawing, I thought, well, like I said, I'm already doing it anyway. I cleaned it up. Definitely a little more tedious process drawing in pen and ink and that type of thing, because of, obviously, it's India ink and you have to be very careful. It's hard to correct mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. But it came off very nicely, and I sent it off, and I forgot all about it because I was, like newspaper journalists, probably Nathan, you guys, when you're doing openings for shows and all that stuff, deadlines are deadlines.
Yeah,
and you tend to focus and you forget about other stuff. And well, I truly, sincerely forgot about the Holland drawing competition and what I'd sent off. And I can remember looking at the phone, I get a call and it said LIB of CON, Library of Congress. And I thought, well, that's got to be a solicitation. And
they want some donations.
well, or whatever. And I was going to let it ring through voicemail, and it rang. It was on the third ring, which I think I have my voicemail set up. And I thought, that doesn't look right. I better pick that up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the director of the architectural engineering documentation at the Library of Congress, Ford Petrus. And he said, Dad, I'm calling. I wanted to congratulate you. You won the Holland Prize. Now that was the first time, the inaugural competition, and you've won $1,000 and some some accolades and that type of thing. Well, of course I was thrilled. And it did take 1.5 years to collect on the $1,000. FYI, just not a government comment. And they actually got mixed up. And but I did eventually get the check, which was donated to the Dome, of course. And it was funny. About 6 months after that, I got a call again from the National Park Service. Mr. Heckman, we're sorry. We're going to send you your check for winning the Holland Prize like 2 years ago or something like that. And dang it, I was too honest. I should have let them send me another one and give that to the Dome. But I actually fessed up and I was like, guys, you already sent me one. But at any rate, it was a lot of fun winning the competition. And since then, we have done what I call a synthetic blueprint, or actually a distressed blueprint version that looks like an old job-worn drawing in the old-fashioned blueprint blue reproduction process from the 60s and 70s. Or 50s and 60s, and I want to give Chris DeShazo with Spectrum Graphics special credit here, because she took my original and created the blueprint version. And then there was another version created after that in full color that Kelsey Kaufman, now Kelsey Jordan, also helped on. And all of those editions are available on the Bucky Dome website. That's the cheesy solicitation portion of the interview.
That's perfect.
But they are copies, different sizes, in archival quality inks and papers. So whoever is watching, please go to the website RBF Dome NFP, and or just type in Google Bucky Dome and enjoy some of the information there on the Bucky Dome.
Well, and we've got all the right plugs along the way. In John's conversation, we talked about reopening the Dome up for tours and the actual physical component of it. So given the pitch for the website and some of the components to it, and contributions that you've made along the way, I think that's a great fit. I love again, I feel like after John's conversation and undoubtedly after the conversation that we're having now, that I've got to expand my circle of friends to include some more architecture, some architects, because I didn't realize just how much concern for the concept of communication through physical design that you guys really buy into, and how that kind of drives this. And for me, on the interpersonal social aspect of it, learning from my classes, the idea of presence of the hand. And you described that perfectly, and so much more in that presence of the hand for you that is tied directly into your personal story, right? Going back to being a young person, having somebody recognize that talent in you, and then nurturing that through, and then being a capable enough human being to hang on to all of your tools over the course of the year, so that when something meaningful like this presents itself, you tie it all together in a nice, neat little package.
It was emotionally a full circle moment, really was. And I should mention too, when I started the intro on, was actually fascinated by Bucky's geometry. That was sort of a coincidental statement in my coming of age. In high school, I really didn't know. I wanted to be a designer. In fact, when I was 5 years old, I wanted to be an architect, a marine biologist. No deference to the Seinfeld episode where George Costanza almost says the same thing word for word. I was like, oh, great. But that predates Seinfeld by many years.
Hey, turns out the show about nothing was the show about everything, and we just never really
yeah,
did, right?
Exactly. Another coincidence of opposites. Well, at any rate, I was talking with my counselor in high school, whom I sort of despised, I have to admit. And that's another long story that is not worthy of this podcast, probably, but I'll tell you later, Nathan. And but at any rate, it was all. He said he pulled out one of those old college reference manual things from SIU, and he pulled open the design department, and there was a picture of Bucky, and and of course SIU would have certainly promoted all of that back then in the design department. And I was like, wow, he might be right on this, and signed up, and glad I did. So I come to school, and I can remember the first design course I took was kind of a summary of design by several of the instructors, and I think it was John Lonergan. He was actually campus architect for some time. I actually ended up working with for years his son Greg, but it was John introducing some of Bucky's ideas on geodesics. And I had had an epiphany when I was quite young that I didn't realize that the importance of it until I watched this little film clip of Bucky explaining the icosahedron and the platonic solids and the expansion of the icosahedron into a geodesic, etc. And my epiphany was when I was really, really little. I was raised by my grandparents through those formative years. And I can remember my grandmother, some of my very earliest memories, carrying me in her arm. And we lived out in the middle of nowhere, northeast Missouri. We didn't have running water, the whole bit. We did have power. And so we lived pretty close to the earth by today's standards. And there was a large lightning-struck silver maple in the front yard. And this was one of those 36-inch plus diameter trees that was all rotted and hollowed out inside, but still alive.
Yeah.
Had a huge black snake that lived in it that we were told never to disturb, because for my grandparents that was rat control and mice control. and he knew, apparently he knew of his privilege, because we would sit on the front walk and he would slither down the tree and come right towards us and go under the house, and everything was fine.
Yeah.
He was family. And but at any rate, my grandmother would carry me under this gigantic silver maple that had been struck by lightning many, many years ago. And one of its principal limbs had long ago split over and had formed, healed and scarred over and formed a surprising natural arch, of which its far end branches with the leaves were nearly touching the ground. It was truly a natural arch, and the entrance to our house was right under it. And I used to reach up trying to touch it while she carried me. And I used to tell students, in a common sense way, people have a good sense of structure, even though they may struggle with the mathematics. We all have a good sense of structure, I happen to think. And even in my very young years, I'd look at that tree and wondered, how come that limb didn't break off?
Yeah.
That thing should break. So fast forward a few years, and I'm playing out behind the barn on this old foundation slab that has wood and all cans of rusty nails and stuff, and I had borrowed my grandfather's hammer, and I decided I was going to make a window. And I looked at our old farmhouse. This was, again, very rural, past rural, primitive rural. And I looked at the window, and I found some suitable boards, old barn siding boards, gray, and laid out 2 long ones and 2 short ones on the top, and just took a single nail, and I'm probably about 8, and just trying to beat a nail in each corner to make a window. Pretty glamorous stuff, here. And of course I tilted up, and I was very small. I'm a small man now. I was extremely small as I was growing up, but I tilted it up, and of course I'd made a parallelogram. It just would not hold any shape whatsoever. It was, a rhomboid, and then it would be kind of a rectangle, and I was completely disgusted with myself, because my window wasn't a window at all. And so in sort of I remember it was somewhat of a fit. I took the hammer and I popped off one of the short legs at the top, swung the 2 long pieces together, and just slammed a nail through it, and like I said, sort of just seeing what it would do. And all of a sudden, and of course, I'd made a large isosceles triangle with 1 nail in each of the vertexes. And all of a sudden, and I can remember pulling on it really hard for whatever a smallish 8-year-old kid can do, and it wouldn't budge a bit. Well, nothing had changed, and I remember looking at it, and I was like, nothing changed. The nails were the same, the boards were the same. The only thing different was the triangular orientation. And it's a goosebump moment now. I don't know if that's caught on camera or not, but all of a sudden I looked at that lightning struck silver maple, and I thought, that's what's holding that maple together. It's triangles. It's made of triangles. And then I looked straight up at the sun because I realized everything is made of triangles. Fast forward to a freshman in college. Here's a guy, smallish in stature too, by the way, pointing out to everyone everything is made of triangles. And I said, you're right. I found that out for myself. That's my link to Bucky. And so it's less on all the philosophical side of things. It's just, oh, wow, I know where you're coming from.
It is carnal in nature. Like it just listening to you, the feeling that comes through is just how natural that fit is. And like again, what the silly things that I can relate back to, not really having the mind for design offhand, is like the aerodynamics of a vehicle being that of a fish, understanding that the way that one cuts through air is the same one cuts through water, and how nature just exists, and you're going to gravitate towards it, and you're just going to find it as you go along. That there's nothing that we've done to invent the principles of physics. They just exist, and we find them as we come along in life.
Discover them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, building morphology, the study of shapes, et cetera, is a whole branch of mathematics as well as practical and industrial design. So, but that's probably my strongest link to all of Bucky's, and I still enjoy the geometry very much.
Well, I love the command over the story as well. And another thing that we were talking about leading into the podcast was the pocketbook with notes. That also is something that has stuck with you for a very long time, since childhood. And do those things kind of seem to complement each other?
Yeah, I forgot you were going to bring that up. I usually don't mention that a whole lot. Here in my shirt pocket, my wife lovingly calls it my nerd pad. I not sure how I'm supposed to take that, but that's fine. And I was actually laying on the living room floor at the age of 14 years old, because I remember this moment, like my triangle epiphany. There are certain events that trigger thoughts, and I understand it was the only interview Red Skelton, the comedian, and Nathan, you probably don't know who Red Skelton is.
I've got an idea. I've got an idea.
And he's a funny guy, especially back then. Excuse me. And I was watching again. My understanding of the only interview Red Skelton did, and they asked Mr. Skelton, how do you come up with your comedic ideas? And he said, oh, I always keep a paper and pencil with me, and I write them down. And I thought to myself, I was watching that, and you're young and you have ideas, and I thought, well, that's a really good idea. So I actually started keeping idea notebooks. Now, they're not journal. I don't keep a journal. I don't keep a diary, that kind of thing. It's simply an idea log. And I started doing that at 14. I still have them all, in fact. And it was right around the freshman year of college and the Bucky thing and all of that just mentioned, that I thought, I probably ought to date and timestamp these things. So I didn't do that before, so they're just kind of all random, although I can kind of tell by context how old I am. And so I started date and time stamping, and then I kind of formalized that a little more, and where I think my wife found them, actually, started keeping these little notebooks, and I've literally got thousands and thousands of entries. And I've sort of wanted to, it might be a retirement project, to get them all out, make a data set, since I had the time and date stamps from when I was about 19 or 20, and just, plot that on, a graph, and, okay, when do ideas come, when do they flow, what events in my life, and, you can start, it's like, oh, this is kind of an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, and there's, lots of ideas for inventions and things, of which there's quite a few of them out there now, for better or worse. But it was it was a valuable inventory, and I can remember taking in college Jack Hayward's Religious Studies and Music and Art course, another absolutely fantastic course with a wonderful instructor for those out there who knew Jack. And he and I would talk. We became somewhat friends afterwards. And he was saying, Thad, yeah, he says you write those down because you have to get rid of your thoughts. Took me a few more years of maturing to realize he was exactly right. You have to get rid of your thoughts, and by doing so and inventorying and writing them down, more are generated. And so it's the inventory is a convenience for reference, but there's a deeper aspect to it. Is it frees the subconscious to keep moving, and however that dynamic in our brain works, I'm sort of fascinated by it, because there's something's going on while we think we're processing. There's deeper processes, I think, going on as well.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the importance of, as we discussed at the beginning of this, the learning how to think along the way. I mean, was there an influence over the process that college had, outside of just thinking, oh, well, maybe I should date and timestamp these, but the way that the thought process and the documentation rolled along as you just kind of got exposed to more ways to think and things to think about?
Well, I'll have to credit the design department, and because, again, they especially, well, I don't even want to say especially, Harold's course was instrumental, but really all the design courses were just, great courses for learning how to create, or to ideate, as Harold Grosowski used to say. And there is certainly a link with inventorying the ideas, because it's like, it's okay to free associate and come up with ideas, and again, Jack was right, write them down so you can at least free your mind and move on to other things. And now I'm at the point in my life, looking at senior years directly ahead, and wanting to, oh wow, would it be a blast to go back and inventory all that on a searchable database, which is, that's relatively easy to do now. And there are a lot of good ideas, and there are some themes that are years old from, actually, one of my most important themes from calculus class that I would love to go back and research and bring up. And I want to mention even Jack Elmer, and who was a strong proponent of general systems theory, which has sort of gone by the wayside. Perhaps that's okay, but
is general systems theory about kind of the interconnectivity of everything?
That in simple terms, that's a good way of putting it, Nathan. I think they might have pushed it a little too. Huh?
I said I'm a simple man, Thad. I'm a simple man.
Well, I don't mean it in an insulting fashion, for sure. But what I was actually getting to is general systems theories. They get a little full of themselves, I think, but it's a fantastic idea, and that there are commonalities in all things, and that there might be a mathematical underpinning. Well, there's been a lot of great thinkers that have thought of that for many years, prior to Da Vinci and Plato and everybody else in the ancient Greek world, probably. But it was definitely college and the design department that was responsible, or the catalyst for all that, is probably the better way to put it.
That's great. No, it's there's just a lot of inspiration to be had. For all the grief that higher education gets anymore these days, and I can understand it as the whole network of higher education has expanded over time, that still a place like SIU, its value is in that experiential component to education. And just like I was talking to Camille Davidson, who's the dean of the School of Law, just for the previous episode, and she was like, talking about just how the interaction between the students and the community and the actual work and all of these components that tie together, and how it's not just about sitting in a classroom and open a book, close a book, regurgitate some information back and forth, but it's about living life and kind of a controlled environment to help you get your wings under you for the first couple years as you kind of find out, well, what your calling and your direction in life.
Sure. Yeah, you know, I was a little lucky in that because, again, from 5 years old, I remember wanting to be an architect or a marine biologist.
Mm-hmm.
I did pursue the one. I happened to have a 330-gallon reef in my studio, just a few feet from my drawing board, and probably a very large shell collection by Midwest standards, and my son and I have a strong interest in invertebrate paleontology, of which we have some good fossiling areas in the region.
Yeah.
So it turns out that I tended to follow my early muse, and proud father mentioned as my son went into biology, especially aquatic, more interested in fresh and brackish water than marine,
Mm-hmm.
and my daughter is studying to be an architect. So the proud father is they took their dad's different interests and went their own ways.
I think that speaks to you as a parent, speaks to any parent who, when their children happen to just have dreams that align with their parent, that where that happens to come from is just the fact that a good parent has exposed their child to these things that they love in a way that is positively related to the rest of their life, and they say, hey, you know what, maybe this is a passion that I have too. It just kind of all snaps together.
Well, I sure wouldn't push a kid in architecture because it's not easy, and I, having taught it for 23 years roughly, and including construction, and you would, I think I would detect students that their parents were kind of imposing, oh, you need to be an architect and that kind of, and
Yeah.
if you don't really want to do it, it's not easy to accomplish. Like, I think any of the professions, law or medicine or anything, you got to really want to do it.
Yeah.
And then that makes it, I don't want to say much easier, but somewhat easier.
What and I guess from a professor standpoint, I mean, what is it like to have to make an approach on that and to like just be mindful of somebody who maybe this isn't their calling, and just being, I don't know, approachable about the subject with somebody?
That's a toughie. You're asking a good question there. First off, I think, paralleling medicine, do no harm.
Yeah.
And then, I actually know a colleague who their instructor absolutely told him, you have no business being an architect. And so he did it out of spite, I think, for that instructor. He
Those are
managed,
some of the best.
well, I don't know. And but I don't think that's a good approach. I enjoy being candid with my students, but I think they have to discover on their own,
Yeah.
and you have to provide the input and impetus to discover on their own where their direction lies. And I'm not one to believe it's okay to give everybody an A and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And I was told by one of my students, like, Thad, you're a hard grader, but you're fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I'm okay with that, because I don't really want, for example, again in medicine, I don't really want my doctor who kind of, they let him go. It's okay, we'll let you go. I was like, either you know it or you don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
but no, I think that's a tough question, Nathan. I don't have I think that's more of a psychological or someone a mental professional to ask than a instructor. But it is something to be careful with.
Well, and it's reasonable to just say, hey, you've got to let folks find it on their own. That the process will allow folks to discover, if this isn't the thing for me, it's not the thing for me.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah,
I just remember almost every class I started, after you do your intros and things, I would tell them that I will grade accordingly, but I will not reward incompetence. And
Yeah.
I think that was the best benchmark rule that I could give them. I will not reward you for acting incompetently.
Yeah.
If you make a mistake, that's fine, probably good. You learn a lot from it. But if you're just acting incompetently and wanting rewarded, I'm not going to do that.
Well, and I think that's a good jumping off point into just the professionalism of the work that you do now, right? And probably something that you've had to, just like any good architect would probably have to combat, just like any good site manager, foreman, any sort of somebody that runs a reputable company has to look out and say, I can't accept for there to be incompetent work in this space because of the importance that infrastructure and design plays in the existence of everybody in a physical space.
I don't think I have a lot of comment to that. Agreed. Yeah, again, you don't want any of your professionals acting incompetently. We're all human. You're going to make mistakes and things happen, but having the responsibility to correct them too.
Yeah, no, and that's, I think that by itself makes me very excited. Just what you had shared with me a little bit, and I'm happy to cut this out if you're like, hey, I don't want that in the podcast part, but just to share it, working on the design for the multimodal transportation system, right, and understanding how important that the functionality of this structure in as much space as it is going to take up, and is important of a what's the word I'm looking for here? A vein or a place where people congregate and exist together. Just to know that mindset is in place going into a project that is going to define a pretty solid section of this town for decades to come.
Well, thanks. Nathan didn't know you were going to bring that up. Well, first, I think the best first comment is it's not me; it's a whole team, and the city, and I think if anybody thinks they're doing that on their own, they probably ought to sit down and kind of rethink things. But one, I enjoy it, and I've really enjoyed working with the city for years. I've done quite a bit of work for the city, in fact, over the years, and the city hired me some, I guess it was, we started in 2013, 2014, we started really generating the information. 2016 produced a concept design, which you might have seen out and around.
Oh yeah, is it the one that's kind of got the awning space and?
Yeah, that stuff's been around a while, and in fact it's directly across the street from here over or north
PK's
of us,
parking
across
lot,
from
right?
PK's, yeah. So, that was fortunate because it provided a good background. However, for fairness in the profession, there's various laws, and the city did mandate interviews by whomever firms, and I understand firms from Chicago, St. Louis, etc., interviewed. We were very fortunate to come through that. Myself and the design team. I'm working with H&B Architects here in town, LLC, and I think the home court advantage helped, but it's pretty scary going up against the big firms and all. But back to answering your question is, boy, you take none of that for granted. It takes the entire team effort in the city and community input and that type of thing to put together a project like that. We have a lot of meetings with Amtrak, the various, you guys have seen the transit services buses, mm-hmm. Jackson County, Mass Transit rides, Mass Transit, etc. for the areas. All of those entities and agencies have input. And frankly, it's been an enjoyable process. So it'll be a while, but it is now actively underway.
Well, and in terms of the time to be investing in something that's directly connected to railroad infrastructure, at this point in time in contemporary American life, right, where we are putting some level of focus on rail infrastructure and an interest in moving people around this country on the ground by rail.
Yeah, I think there's been some Amtrak incentives offered very recently by the current administration. But Nathan, you and I were talking about, and you're a local. I've been here for what would we say, 46, 47 years.
You count now. You count.
Yeah, you were raised here, and the generations before, so you've got the history, and we're all a lot of us remember the dynamic years of SIU and town, and I was speaking with Gary Williams quite some time ago, before the holidays, that we hopefully we're at the bottom of a trough and starting to come back up. I think the new multimodal SIM, Southern Illinois Multimodal Station, will be a big help in that regard. I think now that we're going to be, post-COVID here soon, it
Right.
sounds like that that the university as well as businesses will rally. And with the transportation becoming more of a focus that you mentioned, Nathan, that Carbondale will start to gear back up. That's sure the hope.
Yeah. Well, and again, just having folks on the inside of these. Gary's a good example of it, because Gary's grown up in the area and has his own particular set of coming of age story in Carbondale, just like any of us do. And to have somebody like you guys that are working on things and understand the social component to the infrastructure that goes in place, right? That's something that I think if people just had a better understanding of the socialized understanding of the infrastructure work that's being put into the town, that it would put some minds at ease to understand, we're not just building for the sake of building, that we understand that we're building for the sake of people and what that means along the way.
I think I can assure you on all of the design and the city team and all that is at the heart of it, and should be. And I think most of the endeavors, you guys are renovating and working on the varsity. Yeah, it's a personal love, good for you, but it's also to activate the community. And I've got a lot of fond memories of this old theater. It was popular when I was in college, and the old bar stool diner downstairs when it was in its heyday and all of that. Those were good years.
Yeah, and as we were talking beforehand, that's just what I like about this project as the podcast project, but doing it in a space that is it's just all about memories. It's all about understanding where we come from, but also kind of charting that course forward. So it's just it's tough days, no doubt. It's nice to have a lot of people here that understand it, have seen it, have engaged it, but also everybody that's working towards moving our community out of it and into a better spot. And it's cool. Gary's fed me some interviews thus far for the podcast, and it's nice to feel like, okay, it's comfortable being able and having kind of a little bit of a blessing to have these conversations and be comfortable tying all of it together, because there's it's one thing to just read it in the newspaper and be like, oh, okay, this is what's going on, right? But there's a real person behind, or there are real people, as we've said, teams behind these that now even if it's just 10 or 15 people, have a little bit more understanding of just one of the processes of thought that is going into designing this whole facility here.
Yeah, it's an adventure. And kind of coming back to our initial discussion, segueing from you guys' work on the varsity and others in the area, and likewise the Bucky Dome,
Yep.
which again, it was in pretty rough shape, and it's now nearly completely done on the interior. And of course the exterior was done a few years ago. The phase 1, phase 2 is the interior preservation, which is, I'm going to give it 97+% done, and it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
It really, Ed Cook was the contractor. He's another one, Nathan, to put on your interview list.
Yeah.
Allow 3 hours, and great guy, but his heart was in it and did a really good job with a good board, and members of the board like Judy and Bill Perk and et cetera, Larry Weatherford, another long-standing local, with his old sign company, and it's been worth the effort. What
was your initial exposure to the project, or the opportunity to be a contributor to the Dome Home restoration?
There's a little history with that, come to think of it. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. I actually did, I was asked by, who was it? I do not remember. Might have been Bill Perk as a board member on the Dome, but I'm not sure, Nathan. But back in, I want to say early 2000s, might have been 2001 or two. It's in the city records, but I was asked to do a brief outline. I don't even want to call it a study on the condition of the Bucky Dome for the city. I did so. I think at that time Cornelius Crane, everyone knew him as Corny, became or was the president of the Dome organization at that time. And there was a solicitation to select a preservation architect, of which I know my proposal was probably not quite as expensive, but I was not selected, which is fine. Some disappointment, but I had a young, new business, and I was busy, so you win some, you lose some. And I kind of dropped off the scene regarding the Bucky stuff, and then I think around 2003, Brent Ritzel became president, and he asked if I would return back to working on the Dome. So to answer your question succinctly, it was Brent Ritzel's request direct to me, because I remember when he asked me, Thad, would you come back?
Yeah.
We'd like to have you do the preservation work. I don't know what the history was prior to that or why the change, but I was flattered and glad to accept. And since then, every moment of my professional time, excluding even all the donation time, but all the professional time was donated, and I was glad I did it. It like probably this building. I don't know if you guys get donation for services or things on this, but we'd like to see the varsity come back like it was originally too, of course. But and in fact, we used the professional time. When Brent acquired, or when the Dome organization acquired the Save America's Treasures grant, that Brent wrote the grant for, we used a lot of the professional time that I donated, had to be documented obviously, for the National Park Service, as the matching grant credit. That was a $125,000 grant. So we used that, as well as some other services local folks provided, to match in dollar amount the $125K from the National Park Service Preservation Save America Treasures grant. So it worked out really well, and frankly, it saved the Dome, because had that grant not been written, and we had the Dome was, well, not an exaggeration, collapsing on one of its components. One of the hexes was literally starting to cave in and was propped up by a notable 6x6 that we all think fondly of, and if you weren't watching carefully when you walked through, you'd bump your head on it. But those days are over. The Dome is safe, and Nathan, it should be in good condition for well into the next generation that you will command.
I think that it's it speaks so much to the character of this physical space, and it's the type of thing that requires there to be about a dozen people that just care to put the effort forward and into it. I mean, like you said, the same deal here, right? It takes just about a dozen people that really care, that have all sorts of different sets of skills that they can just push it on with.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of mention the book that Carrie Odell and I wrote regarding the history of the Dome. I would strongly advocate for anybody wanting to do a preservation project to write a book about the building you're preserving, because not only did we get people coming out of the woodwork with knowledge of the history and old photos and things, from all over, as far away as Bali and Southeast Asia to across the street. We really found out a lot of valuable historic data that all of us, we thought we knew early on, and we were just flat out wrong. And it's like, oh my gosh, here's the picture of that light fixture that we assumed kind of looked like this, but nobody really knew. And the flooring materials and things like that we thought we knew what they were, and we were just wrong. And so we were fortunate. It was serendipity that Carrie and I wrote the book. And I'm going to go ahead and mention, because, again, Carrie is principal author, but actually what started it is I gave him a tour of the dome. He's local from, and his brother is actually Les Odell here in town. And so I was giving Carrie a tour of the dome, and when we were near finished, he said, "Dad, why don't you write a book about the dome?" And I said, "Oh, good gosh, Carrie, I don't have time for that." Mm-hmm. And I turned to him and said, "Well, Carrie, why don't you write one? You have a couple of books." He has an autobiography. I mean, a biography of Virginia Marmaduke, which is, you're in theater. You've got to know Virginia, Nathan, and she's quite a character in herself. And he did another couple of books, History of Women in TV. I'm sorry, I don't know the title as well as another one. I said, "Well, Carrie, why don't you write a book?" So about 2 weeks later, Carrie calls me and says, "You know what, Thad? I was thinking about that. Would you consider writing a book on the Bucky Dome?" And fortunately, he, especially with timeline and my profession, he was willing to be a principal author. But it turned out it took a whole lot more time than I anticipated on my end, too, and I enjoyed every bit of it. And plus, with Carrie having access as an employee at the Library of Congress, you can't beat that for resource.
Yeah,
So
I would say so.
so anyway, it worked out quite well, and it was published right in the middle of COVID, of course, unknowingly, on March 31st of last year. And so I was just at Barnes & Noble on Thursday asking the manager. We were planning a book signing for April 4th of last year, of which COVID obviously prevented that. So I just happened to stop by last Thursday and ask Amber, the manager over at Barnes & Noble, if the corporation of Barnes & Noble is going to free up to do book signings and things like that, which we think will be soon. So hopefully you'll see in the news that Carrie will come up he lives in the Culpeper, Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, that he'll come up and we will have a real book signing.
Good.
Looking forward to it.
You guys deserve it. Carrie's done a great job out there pushing the
website,
everything on social media.
Sure
he's using all the Carbondale Facebook groups to distribute it far and wide. I'm sure he's in every geodesic dome Facebook group there is.
And we need it. Yeah, and he's good at it, and we need the in fact, I think our membership on the Facebook page is up like 1,200 or something now, and it's been the page has existed, I think, for years. But with Carrie's initiative, holy cow, we're getting a lot more joining, and again, kudos to him.
Well, and it's one of those things that at some point in time, as the project continues to tie together, there's going to be a couple people that write in influential ways for larger publications that are going to take note, and all of a sudden, it's probably just going to get picked up and then brought to the next level in terms of just notoriety and visibility of the project. Because you guys said you're still working on the specification as a historical.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking that a moment ago. It's like I sent an email off. We wrote, there's a specific set of requirements for obtaining the National Historic Landmark status, and that was initiated. I sent off some information and actually a request to start the process to speaking in their terms. I want to say it was late fall, November, something like that. Mm-hmm. And now that you brought it up, I literally was just thinking a while ago when you and I were chatting before we started rolling that I haven't heard from them, and it's sort of disappointing. Yeah. So I need to follow up again because we're trying to get that going. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Hey, step
and
by step.
It will. I think we'll. I mean, who's going to say no to the Bucky Dome?
Yeah.
That's a that's nationally known anyway.
Yep. It is the real deal.
It is the deal, and
What was the book one of your first runs at authoring, as then, or was this?
No, it was, and that's what when Carrie called and asked, I really wanted to do it. I wish I could have been more involved in a lot of the original authorship, but I just couldn't afford the time professionally, and I wanted to do it as a dry run to learn about how to publish a book.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great to have a guy that's done it at least 3 times to show you the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was great, and it's a little bit of a confidence builder too. That I can remember when I was in college, and I'd mentioned Jack Hayward. He was the director of the religious studies department back in my day in college. And he was talking about the day, he was telling us one day about when he held his child for the first time upon being born, and he had the same feeling when he held his first book. So, and I was like, wow, and I can, and obviously that hit a note with me because I can still remember it, 40 some odd years later. And so I can remember, I was sort of surprised that you don't get very many free copies. Mm-hmm. And then you get the lecture from the publishers like, don't give books away. We're trying to sell them.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
That's
I get that.
Okay, it's still a business.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, okay.
Guys.
And so we get like 6 copies or something and I'm thinking, is that all? And I can remember a Stephen King interview, and I was looking in the background at his bookshelf while they were interviewing Stephen King, big time famous author. Mm-hmm. And there's all these same copies of the book. I mean, he's got 50 of them he can give out. So we get 6. Really?
Hey,
that all?
Stephen King's only getting 50 free copies to give out, right? I think that says more positively about you guys than anything. Like, wow, Stephen King gets 50 and we still get 6? No.
He probably paid for them. I don't know.
Fair.
But and I might have misspoke. We might have got a dozen. I can't remember if Carrie and I each got 12 or we got 12 total and we had to split. I don't remember now. The point being, who cares? It was disappointing. Is that all we get? Right. Really? After all this? we get to buy them at a discount. Okay, well, that helps.
You cover the printing costs.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that's it, by the way.
And you said you ended up sending one to London, or where was that gentleman's
firm? It was, on a lark. I was aware from my readings of Bucky, again, back in college, when I did most of my Bucky reading, I was aware that he had collaborated with Norman Foster, who's one of the premier architects in the world right now. He's probably in his low 80s right now. And so Carrie and I were working on the Dome Home, as I like to call it, and it hit me. I was like, I wonder if Lord Foster, even though I'm certainly world-class busy and being one of the most famous architects in the world, some examples of his work. An easy example is the Apple campus in Southern California.
Uh-huh.
Enough said. So I just, on a lark, I fired off an email to Foster Plus Partners, who is in London, and then promptly forgot about that too. And
that's it, man. That's what the deadlines do to you. Just set it, forget it. And
send it, forget
if it comes back to you, great. If it doesn't, next project.
Throw it out there. If you get a bite, try to reel it in. Otherwise, don't worry about it. And I'll be darned if about 2 weeks later I get a bite. I got an email from, and I don't remember the name. It was kind of unusual, kind of English sounding, but a very, very polite email, informing me that he is to be addressed Lord Foster. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll try to remember that. And he's very interested in writing the introduction to your book on the history of Bucky's Dome. And I was like, holy cow. And I truly, I didn't expect to hear anything. You just throw it out and you see what happens. And by golly. And so I exchanged a few emails back and forth with London and Lord Foster, and He'd ask, well, what do you want in what, and I, just something personal from you. I'm not going to tell you what to write. That's
You're Lord Foster, man.
Yeah.
It's not for me to tell you.
Yeah,
what to write.
you tell us. And he wrote, and and I'm thrilled with I truly am thrilled with it. And I actually, it's sort of humbling, but I made copies of all of our preservation drawings, which are old school. They're hand drawn, hence the Holland Prize we mentioned earlier. And I made copies of the Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3 drawings, complete, a nice set, rolled them up. I made digital copies and sent those to him. I sent him a signed large sheet of the Holland Prize, and just rolled it up, and it was, by the way, way more expensive shipping that to London than I guessed. But that's okay. And I
mean, the Lord doesn't get free shipping over here?
Apparently, across the pond doesn't matter a whole lot. But at any rate, so and I got a very nice letter back that I truly appreciated. And in fact, and he has requested, and I owe him an email now, in fact, to keep him updated on our progress. And of course, you might have seen, Nathan, been a few months ago now, that the Fuller family donated, a large amount of Bucky's original archives that used to be in the dome, and we're absolutely
something like 3,500 pieces
of books, and then a lot of the furnishings, and we're thrilled, absolutely thrilled to get them, and they're home now. They're back to where they were, and excuse me, and I do want to update Lord Foster on all that acquisition and the newspaper articles and that type of thing, which I need to do soon. But again, excuse me, been pretty busy. But that was again on a lark, surprising outcome, and really rewarding for our book.
No, and that is another. You're spot on with the transition points, because this has been a rewarding conversation for episode 68 of the WTF Carbondale podcast. I hope that it has been as rewarding for you as it has been for me to get here and just pick at a little bit more of the Bucky Dome history, and another interesting person here in Carbondale in Thad Heckman, not Hackman. Shared that little bit of commiseration over Heckman, Columbo, and sometimes you just meet people that also have name things going on. It's fun how that works out. And have a good one, folks, whatever that one may be.
Thank you, Nathan.